Donald Trump becomes the first president in American history to be impeached twice and banned from all social media. What do these decisions tell us about the divisive nature of American politics currently and where true power lies?
He must go. He is a clear and present danger to the nation that we all love.
This morning, with just 6 days left in the White House, President Trump is waking up as the only president in U.S. history to ever be impeached twice.
Seems like an action that's likely to cause yet more division, with people that loathe Trump thinking it's long overdue and necessary, and those that support him taking this as further evidence of deep state conspiracy and media manipulation from the fake news. Whatever you think of the impeachment, at least it's happening within the world of political process. 10 Republicans voting for the impeachment, and it is being decided by elected officials, whatever questions you may have about the way that Washington power operates. The decision to ban Donald Trump from social media has more complex questions about private power and how power is issued, used, explored, designated.
The impeachment vote was to decide whether or not the president should stand trial. The answer was yes. He will now go on trial in the upper house, the Senate, though it's not sure when.
In a sense, I suppose, regarding the impeachment, we have to ask, is it a ceremonial exercise or what function does it serve? I see that Nancy Pelosi said that even in this 7 days, Donald Trump could create more chaos, and that's yet to be seen. Certainly the FBI say that there are serious plots from white supremacist terrorist groups to take further militant action, but it seems at this stage, to me at least, that the impeachment is a ritualized process of shaming and an attempt to separate America's future from America's past.
The most bipartisan impeachment ever, 10 Republicans joining Democrats to charge the president with incitement of insurrection for encouraging the mob that attacked the Capitol and doing nothing to stop it.
If you glance at the darker corners of the internet, you'll see people that are like what you might call right-wing conspirators saying like, oh, this whole thing was staged by Antifa. On the left, you'll hear people saying there were MAGA militia that were being allowed through, both in fact using the same things as examples for their argument. Oh, there were selfies taken with cops, people were just letting them in and ushering them in. I've seen arguments made by both the left and right using the same evidence. And for me, as a person that's always been somewhat anti-establishment in my thinking, it's challenging to see the way that the lines around establishment are being maneuvered.
The President Trump, has been banned indefinitely from Facebook and Instagram.
Twitter permanently banning the commander-in-chief's personal account with 88 million followers.
First, Donald Trump was suspended from Twitter, then Facebook, Snapchat, Spotify, Twitch, Shopify, didn't even know that existed, and Stripe, also didn't know, have all followed suit, while Reddit, TikTok, YouTube, and even Pinterest have announced new restrictions on posting in support of the president or his actions. The ban was called for by, among others, Michelle Obama, who said on Thursday that the Silicon Valley platforms should stop enabling him because of his monstrous behaviour. On Monday, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel made it clear that she thought it was problematic that Trump had been blocked, calling freedom of speech a fundamental right of elementary significance. She said any restriction should be according to the law and within the framework defined by legislators, not according to a decision by the management of social media platforms. I looked at Daniel Pinchbeck's newsletter, and he used the Karl Popper illustration about tolerance and intolerance. Does a tolerant society mean we have to tolerate other people's intolerance? Karl Popper makes the argument that no, we can't. We have to operate within certain principles, certain guidelines, and the incitation of violence, incendiary rhetoric, what would be called hate speech now, should be outside the margins of any reasonable or polite society. But as soon as you start to establish those kind of parameters, then of course you have to ask who is establishing them, who benefits, who is excluded. It's an important philosophical territory.
Twitter's actions sparking celebration and outrage.
Trump doubling down in a statement accusing Twitter of banning free speech, adding, "We will not be silenced."
To be clear, and I know again that loads of you watching this will be supporters of Trump because I check out the comments and I know that you are. Like, I'm not a Trump supporter. I believe in kind of a fairer, more just society, that values of tolerance are absolutely vital, that the use of violence to resolve political disputes, whether that's domestically or internationally, is wrong. And as soon as you engage in violence of any type, that you're in a different position in the debate now. I recognise that it's possible that even between the time of making this video and this video being on, there could be terrorist attacks, disturbances, acts of violence that would lead people to say, see, that's what you've got to do. You can't support that. But what I suppose people that are against these measures say that Facebook, Twitter, all of these platforms that could be regarded as monopolies have comparable content on them from dictators in other regimes. Who gets to decide whose violence is legitimate and whose violence isn't is one of the key questions of our time. The violence of one nation against another. Our violence is done by drones and it's very specific and targeted. Oh, their violence is all religious and crazy and mad and they're just out there blowing stuff up. These are the kind of questions that in a democracy have to be brought to the forefront.
After the ban, the president tried to tweet from other campaign and staff accounts, triggering a game of whack-a-mole, with Twitter quickly taking down his posts. Many platforms have banned or restricted the president's accounts, including Facebook and Instagram.
The bans leaving some to ask if First Amendment rights are being violated.
The philosopher and commentator Brad Evans, who's been on the podcast Under the Skin with us many times, says, "Let us be under no illusions. This act represents a deeply symbolic moment in the history of global political affairs. Political power is, after all, ultimately the ability to regulate and control the circulation of freedoms experienced. This especially includes the free circulation of language, ideas, and the communication of thought." It's worth reflecting that Trump was effectively made by these technology firms who gave him the mass divisive audience he craved. Trump was both useful, then utterly disposable for these firms, which will continue to profit from divisions. These platforms have really transformed the political landscape of our times to become the dominant actors in shaping the conduct of life. Marshall McLuhan would say that, of course, the medium is the message, that our consciousness has been altered in ways that we can't even see anymore by our access to social media.
In response, many conservatives saying they would move their social media to self-proclaimed free speech app Parler. The platform temporarily the most downloaded app in Apple's store until it was removed by both Apple and Google. Parler's CEO calling the move an attempt to completely remove free speech off the internet.
Glenn Greenwald said, Parler, a social media platform similar to Twitter, was set up in 2018 and promised far greater privacy protections, including a refusal to aggregate user data in order to monetize them to advertisers. By 2020, it hit the #1 spot on the list of most downloaded apps on the Apple Play Store. This week, Amazon, Google and Apple abruptly united to remove Parler from the internet exactly at the moment when it became the most downloaded app in the country. Glenn Greenwald tweeted here, there's no evidence that any of the Capitol Hill mob were Parler users. But Del Cameron tweets, Parler users breached deep inside the US Capitol as shown by GPS data pulled from videos archived by @donk_MB just before Amazon's takedown. As Recode reported, while some protesters participated in both Parler and Gab, many of the calls to attend the Capitol were from YouTube videos, while many of the key planners have continued to use mainstream platforms like Twitter, Facebook and YouTube. So in a sense, this is another one of those issues that you are going to believe it in a way what you are previously disposed to believe. The presentation of information at this time is all defining. There is not one truth out there. There are so many truths.
Twitter, run by CEO Jack Dorsey, saying after close review of the president's recent tweets, it banned him due to the risk of further incitement of violence. Twitter specifically warning, quote, plans for future armed protests have already begun proliferating on and off Twitter, including a proposed secondary attack on the U.S. Capitol and state Capitol buildings on January 17th.
If we look at this in harmony with some of the other potential legislation that could be taking place, Joe Biden has said that he plans to make a priority of passing a law against domestic terrorism. Of course, in the wake of 9/11, we saw legislation taking place in the form of the Patriot Act that is now used against American citizens. And we know, of course, that many other decisions were taken in the wake of that terrible event. In May 2020, as part of an extension of the Patriot Act, the Senate handed the Trump administration the ability to spy on Americans' web browsing and internet search histories without a warrant. Wow. Due in no small part to the votes of 10 Democrats who, despite portraying Trump as lawless and unaccountable, consistently sided with his administration in privacy and civil liberties issue. Now, in a sense, that one paragraph there, we have all the information we need. Trump increased spying that was already existing under Obama, and 10 sitting Democrats voted in favor of it. So for us to focus so much on the distinctions between these two parties, it seems to me to be naive, if not the willful consumption of a kind of political soma, a palliative drug to will us into a sort of sleep, a slumber, where we don't acknowledge that the problems are far, far deeper than this. And this is not just an American problem. Since the start of the pandemic, leaders around the world have passed emergency legislation, including surveillance of citizens, invoking executive powers and expanding their reach, such as happened under Bush after 9/11. President Obama was unprecedented in his use of the Espionage Act to prosecute those whose whistleblowing he wanted to curtail. Only 10 people in American history have been charged with the Espionage Act for leaking classified information. During Obama's administration, 8 people were charged or convicted, including Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning. More such cases than under all previous administrations combined. So any nostalgic harking back to a kind of recent golden age is willfully myopic and misleading.
Donations drying up this morning.
JP Morgan and Citigroup are halting donations.
A bunch of big businesses announcing they'll suspend donations to lawmakers who voted against certifying President-elect Joe Biden's win, including companies like Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Goldman Sachs, and Ford.
In October, the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Antitrust, Commercial and Administrative Law issued a 425-page report concluding that Amazon, Apple, Facebook and Google all possess monopoly power and are using that power anti-competitively. The European Commission fined Google $4.3 billion for its anti-competitive practices to strengthen its position in various markets through its dominance in the App Store market. The number of new users installing the messaging app Signal every day is on track to cross 1 million, following an update to the privacy policy of WhatsApp owned by Facebook. WhatsApp's new privacy terms reserve the right to share user data, including location and phone number, with its parent Facebook Inc. and units such as Instagram and Messenger. What is the relationship between Silicon Valley and the Democrat Party, which will become all the more important after Biden's inauguration? Well, Silicon Valley giants donated enormous sums of money to the Democrat Party. Executives at Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Google and Microsoft wrote more than 1,000 checks to political groups totaling more than $16 million during the election cycle, with almost all that money going to the Democrats. Biden has subsequently appointed former employees of Facebook, Microsoft and Amazon to his transition team. The relationship between donors and either political appointments or favourable policy is not a new one for either the Republican or Democrat Party. Barack Obama rewarded 31 of his most active campaign donors with plum jobs in foreign embassies, having collectively raised at least $20 million. But Trump too rewarded major campaign donors with prime positions in his cabinet. How are we ever going to have anything approaching fairness without radical changes to the way that politics in America is financed?
Now, the conservative platform predicted by many to become the president's preferred social media alternative is fighting with one of the biggest companies in the world, Parler, suing Amazon after Amazon dropped the site from its web service, effectively wiping them off the internet.
I've never been on Parler, and I've read that it's like a nightmare on there and it's full of hate speech and dreadful violent rhetoric. But bloody hell, if you spend any time on Twitter or Facebook or any social media site, I mean, these places are shadow realms where people say stuff that they're feeling and wouldn't otherwise say. So I'm not surprised that Parler's like that. If you want an end to these two entrenched camps, like it's not just going to disappear after the inauguration of Joe Biden, we have to, as a culture, as a society, as Anglophonic people, as the people of the world, start looking at what is causing this. I don't think there's any solution until we start saying, wherever you fall on the current spectrum of the political debate, we have to look at what shared values we have. That's not to say that Donald Trump isn't inciting violence. That's not to say that Donald Trump isn't engaging in incendiary discourse. There are accounts that Donald Trump was delighted by events at Capitol Hill. You can see that Donald Trump is a person who rouses up a crowd, fake news this, deep state that. The problem is, even though I disagree with Donald Trump, that a lot of his criticisms of the mainstream media and a lot of his allegations about there being a swamp in Washington are true. It will be a lot easier if the conditions that create legitimacy for Donald Trump were addressed, i.e. money was taken out of politics in America, and that in the media landscape it was possible to have an open discourse about all sides of the political spectrum, and that there were areas of the media, which, let's face it, are big companies, that we felt were regulated and had a different agenda other than the support of their own interests and their collaborators at the elite end of the corporate world. So whichever side of the argument you're coming at this from, because I know there's people that watch this video that are supporters of Trump and the Republicans. I know there's people that watch these videos are supporters of the Democrats and can't wait for Biden to be president. But I suppose the perspective that most interests me, and I don't want to make people feel like, oh, there's no hope anyway, but there are institutions at play almost indistinguishable on either side when it comes to key decisions, and that in a way that this video is an invitation to look at what values we want to promote, regardless of these kind of polemical and rather entrenched positions.
No true supporter of mine could ever endorse political violence. No true supporter of mine could ever disrespect law enforcement or our great American flag.
But he had no response to his second impeachment. A trial in the Senate could now start as soon as January 20th, Inauguration Day, and could dominate the early days of Joe Biden's administration.
So I suppose one of the most obvious conclusions that can be drawn from this video, whether you are a Trump supporter or a Joe Biden supporter or cynical about politics in general, is one meaningful thing that could be done is to break the relationship between big business and Washington, to stop big institutional giant companies being able to influence political process. Big business has always had too much power in American politics, and until the culture of lobbying and the influence of politicians from big business is curtailed, you will never see a fairer America. You have to take the money out of politics. You have to vigorously reform the way the country is run and break the relationship between these powerful interests and politicians if ever you're going to see a country run for ordinary people by ordinary people.